fun of, and I hope, I'm pretty sure I saved that voice, so I hope I still have it. It's so long. That is all you gave, Veronica.
You work towards an architect?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about Sonic?
Need a bigger round.
Yeah.
Yep. I left it in here while I was trying to. Hey. I was gonna say, that's what I just do it now.
What do I do?
You got one already in here. Speakers. You're drawing. Anyone else while I'm in here drawing? You have a painting in the back of your head, Jack. You have an extra ticket in there. So I left it in the bathroom. No, why did I told her like heckle.
Make it interesting.
Did you? I wore a blazer.
Yeah. Awesome.
You were doing the presentation right there.
Oh, really? This is one perspective on
Exactly what I
it.
needed. Brian Jacobs.
So what are you doing?
I was in between the two. I was doing marketing and communications at small nonprofit for the last 2 years.
Wait, what was that?
No, I stepped back for a little bit and read this kind of process, but over the last 2 years, what I'm finding is good. There are a lot of these things that animal stuff, I look at how I say
Always the fun.
stakeholders to
That's just going away.
Right. I'm not born with this now, my strength is. So that's what sometimes I feel.
What kind of?
Yeah, both missions way over here and Costco, trying to get people to.
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing? Good. And we just went to Addie last night. I was super happy for the website. Oh, thank you. What are you doing now?
Persuasion, negotiation. I'm sure we're.
Wendy, this is Jamie. Jamie, introduce me. Hi.
I'm sure anytime you talk.
Oh, okay. That's so good.
Do you need me to move down? No. Is there anyone else in here?
You. How do you do something? They like the
Good, how's it going? What's good with you? Really? That's good. That makes me feel. Yeah, and then I went to the
Yeah, she's gonna leave the agency.
We had to,
Can I help you? Hold your chair steady? Yeah. Sure. Can I move your chair to get through?
I put the brakes on.
And then I'll put it back.
Put your brakes on. Thank you. You're welcome. The chairs are tricky.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Do you mean, okay. And I'm putting the brakes back. I'm Jamie. Nice to meet you. Is this your first time, your first one?
This is I think it's my second.
Okay. It's my third one
So nothing about my mobile.
More on the supply side.
Do you need to go to the other one?
I'm not doing it.
There's still time.
Oh, yeah. I'm still trying to get my foot in the right.
Oh, okay. Were you a student here? Okay.
I work in full service.
Okay.
Between that in grad school, and ever since I left it, I've been for years. In a library or anywhere.
Okay. Well, good luck.
So I'm just trying to, network and you're a lot more UX stuff, so I can be more help wherever I am.
Right. When did you study when you were here?
Well, I have my own MLIS.
Yeah, I love talking about them too. People love talking
My
about them.
master's
In fact, I'll show you a video.
in library, in
One day,
information science.
we had people over there, like 4 or 5 6-year-old girls. And so I had them both doing all this, like we had really just, because they're both moving to the music and girls are just
She set up the pop-up library, so she might be hanging around the library. Want to hear?
my wife.
Yeah,
She
she
gets to walk.
I actually met her at the Ohio Library Council conference this past year. Yeah. You guys see me like that?
I do too.
And she and I sat at the same table this morning, so we were able to
Catch up.
catch up.
Oh, good.
So you don't have to switch it on. Yeah.
Wanting to talk to people because I was asked to go back to see your parents.
Out to work?
Yeah.
All right, it's 10:30, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started. That's okay with you guys. A couple of things here. Okay, so today, gonna talk about breaking things down, how we get alignment, and how we set goals for certain things that we're working on. My name is Jay Oldacre. Been doing UX design and product management roles for the better part of 13 or 14 years. Currently at Westfield Insurance in a full-time capacity, and then I work with TopTal doing remote contract work, usually with a lot of startups. We do a lot of work there. We're dipping into the enterprise space at TopTal, but most of the work that I've done over the past 2 years have been with a number of startups. So I like to span that sort of enterprise space with the Westfield Insurance Company and financial tech and services. And then with TopTal, I like to spend my time working with a bunch of really smart people all over the world. Real quick, before we get too deep into my presentation, I do want to do something that I've seen done at other conferences. It's been helpful to me in the past. How many people in here are currently hiring for roles at their organization? Can you guys stand up? Okay. How many people are looking for roles or new gigs? Can you guys stand up? All right.
Nice.
Remember who you guys saw around here and try to make a connection after this. I always find that the value of places like this and events like this is always in the connections that you make, because you guys will be able to get this content online afterwards. So I hope that the relationships that you build here today are good and they help you find people and find each other and work together. So one of the things that I love to do is I love to talk about how we make things. The how being the processes and the ways that we approach our work. The we particularly being the people and the cultures that we build at organizations. Then the making, the actual get your hands dirty and start to do some of the work. And then things being the outcome. What did we spend our time doing and how did we deliver this and what kind of value did it provide? So I love coming to events like World IA Day. Carrie Ann is awesome. She does a great job organizing this stuff. She throws her heart and soul into it. So make sure you stop by to Carrie Ann and say thank you for the work that she puts in, because this is completely a volunteer job. When it comes to World IA Day 2019, I wanted to talk about the topic of the year, designing for difference. Whenever I read through the description for this year, at first I was a little put off by it. I wasn't really sure what to do with it, and I felt like, I completely disagree with what we're talking about. For a number of reasons. Number one, after reading through the description, I thought, wow, one of the mantras that I've sort of lived off of in my design career is, if you try to design for everyone, you design for no one, right? And the description that I was reading through often spoke to that, like difference, all these different people, we need to take care of everybody. And I'm like, I just don't know if we can actually do that, or if that actually leads to real results. And then I started thinking about the day-to-day. And one of the things that occurred to me is we are constantly making choices and saying yes or no whenever we have decisions to make. And that means saying yes to certain people and no to other people. So there is an inclusive and inclusive nature to the work that we do. And it would be unwise for us to stop and not at least identify that in the process. And then I think that getting it right for the target user is already hard enough, let alone trying to account for people that are edge cases or people that don't necessarily fall into that primary category of users that we're getting to. And then ultimately, selling design is already difficult. Like, so how many people here are on the ground, like doing constructive design work in an organization who feels like you have to sell what you do up the chain? Yeah. How many people are in leadership roles where you are the recipient of those sales pitches? Okay, so we got a couple. So convincing those people who are leading our organizations the value of the work that we do is extremely difficult, and it's not something that's often taught in terms of how to do it well, what it actually looks like. We're taught the hardcore tactical skills of like, hey, here's how you do research, here's how you do prototyping, here's how you do testing. But then that thing that actually comes before that, which is how we package it and sell the value of it to our organization, is something that's actually much more difficult. We would call it a soft skill. I don't think that's actually the case, and I think that's actually kind of demeaning of the people who are really good at it, because I think it's a tangible skill that we can all get to, but it takes practice, and it takes having some sort of framework to understand how the whole thing works together. And so when it comes to that, one of the common spaces that I find myself in whenever we're talking about what we do at work as UX designers or information architects is how much time do we get to actually do our job before we have to hand it off to have something built, right? And it's usually like this hyper small window at the very front of the project where we can like check off the UX box that we did UX or we handled our IA work. But ultimately it's like, how fast can we get it into the development pipeline so that we can build it and ship it? And I am all about speed with the work that I do at startups and even at enterprises. I think speed is the ultimate factor, but I also think that like that's also a common problem that we have to fight at organizations. And then we have leadership who like, they will scream from the top of the mountains, hey, we love UX, we want to be a design-centric and a customer-centric company. But do you really? Because your actions don't necessarily map to the things that you're talking about. Okay, it's really easy to be like, hey, this is the kind of place that we want to be, or the kind of way that we want to operate, or even the kind of way that we want to be seen as an organization. But that has to filter down into the people who are doing the tactical work on the ground, and we have to empower them. And if we don't, it can make the whole job really difficult. And then lastly, like resources. Like how many people in here wish they had more resources or time or budget on their team to go out and do the job that they feel like they're being asked to do? Yeah, that's going to be a never-ending battle. So, starting off from this position of how do we get people, sold on the idea of this investment, it's tricky. So what we're going to do today is we're going to try to do our best to break it down a little bit. I'm just going to give you my perspective, which is just one. We have a room of 20-ish people in here. We all have different perspectives on this. My goal here is not to tell you guys how to do it. My goal is to hopefully seed a conversation amongst the group, because we all have like war stories from this stuff, and I think everybody has valuable information to share. So first we're going to talk about goals, because I think goals are something that can drive the entire conversation if we do goals right. And goals can be tricky. And I think where I've seen the most success is know and define your KPIs, key performance indicators, the things that really move your business forward. And honestly, if you don't have KPIs that your organization has handed to you, make them up. Like, make them up and try to get agreement on what those things are between you and your leadership, or you and your teammates. Try to start to create that conversation of working towards something that is a common thread that will spread amongst the work that you're doing. And then understand the mission and vision of your team and of the organization that you're working in. When we start by listening, when we start by taking that position of empathy for those around us and for our leadership, I think it changes everything. It's easy to like fight the bad boss, right? It's easy that you might have a leader who is asking you to do some things that you may not necessarily agree with. But if you step back and you really try to listen to them and hear them, it can change the tone of your relationship. And you can start to understand how to communicate to them better whenever they're not necessarily receiving the messages that you've been sending them. So I think if you start there, if you really start from a position of trying to understand, and you start from a position of how are we being measured for success, I think that sets you up for the best possibility for like shared success moving forward in your projects. And why listen? And we touched on some of this, building empathy for your leadership and communicating effectively. I think those are two key attributes that anybody in any position anywhere, regardless of design, development, library science, whatever capacity that we hold, to be an effective communicator and to work on getting alignment, you have to be able to do those two things first. Listen before you start to speak those things out. Which brings us to the alignment side of things. And what is alignment? I figured it's always good to start off with getting some common definition in the room around what we mean whenever we say alignment. And for me, it really speaks to three specific things. And that is an overall awareness of where we are and what we're working on, what we're doing, the direction that we're headed in, and the rhythm with which we are in and out of alignment. Because I believe it's, for me in my experience, alignment has been like a living, breathing organism or part of the culture and the way that you work. And there are times when you are in alignment, and if you think of it like a guitar would be a good example. If you get all your strings tuned properly, things are going to play great, right? And after playing for a while, things start to go out of tune, and you have to pause and sort of reset and bring them back into tune so that they're going again. And that's where awareness comes into play. Being able to hear and pay attention to the surroundings around you, to the people around you. That's going to help you understand, like, hey, are we working towards the same thing here? Are we playing in harmony, or are we playing out of harmony? And what do we need to do to stop and make sure that we work on getting that kind of alignment back in place? How do we get it? Now, this is where it gets interesting, because I think this changes from organization to organization. Every individual is different, which means every team is different. So these are some things that I've picked up on my journey, but I'd be curious to hear from you guys after we're done, if you guys have any other observations or things that have worked for you in the past. First, you got to start with aligning yourself. I don't think that, it's sort of like being on the airplane and putting your own oxygen mask on before you put anybody else's oxygen masks on. Like, you have to start with that particular goal of figuring out how to find your center point and moving forward before you can start to pull others in with you and try to get them in alignment with you. The next thing that I would say is focus on language. Language is such a big deal, and we don't often slow down long enough to create shared understanding or some commonality around the words that we're using. And it's really easy to think that I'm saying something and you understand the thing that I'm talking about. Even a word like empathy. Like, empathy can mean a bunch of different things for 3 or 5 different people that you're in a meeting with. So I think it's really important in your processes to make sure that that language is shared and that there's an understanding there and that we have a common definition for the things that we're talking about. And then creating reminders, create some checkpoints in your process to make sure that you are aligning to the work that you're doing and that you're in alignment with the team that you're on and that you're all working towards those goals. Now, those KPIs can be a good indicator that you're mapping towards whenever you have these checkpoints in your processes. And I'd encourage you guys to always take a step back and look at how the work you're doing is mapping to those things. But even if you don't have them, always create time and space to pause and remind yourself why you're doing what you're doing and how you need to do better to create that greater sense of alignment. How many people in here work in agile environments? Some good number. Retros are a great space for this. Retros are, for those of you who aren't familiar with agile, at the end of a couple of weeks of work, the team will get together and talk about things that went well or things that didn't go well and how we can improve them. And a retro is a great space to bring up that question of, hey, what are our goals? Or that observation of, hey, we're doing these things, or we have these kinds of behaviors over here, and I don't know if they're necessarily mapping to the goals that we've actually set. So those are good spaces to create reminders and checkpoints to say, hey, how are we actually doing with this part of the process? And then lastly, when it comes to alignment, find partners or other allies if you can get them. And I think of one as a win. If you can even just find one other individual that you start to have some common language with, and you feel like you're working towards the same type of goal with, it becomes much easier to evangelize the cause amongst your bigger team and then inside your organization when there's more than one of you. You're also not holding that burden all on yourself. I think that's another key point here is that we can often feel like we are lone rangers in the process, and we can carry this anxiety and burden of I'm here to champion the customer, and I'm here to do the right thing, and I blah, 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 blah. But I think that ultimately, when we find a partner in crime, it becomes a little easier to make that journey together and we can share the burden that we're carrying when it comes to how we're trying to get these things done. And then lastly, like, no complaining, only making. If we're gonna stop and complain that like, hey, you know, we're not necessarily doing enough for people on the fringes, we're not doing enough in accessibility, we're not doing enough user research, great, I hear you, but you can't stop there. Like, you can't just tweet this stuff out at 140 or 280 characters or whatever and call it a day. Like, you have to actually take action on these things. You have to put that into motion and do something, otherwise I'm probably not going to take you seriously. When you do something, when you make forward movement, it shows how much you actually care about what you're talking about, and you're not just on the sideline making an observation. So now I want to get into the tactics of what this stuff actually means and what it actually looks like. And my first question is, how desperate are you? Because in our world, particularly in UX and IA, you know, we talk a lot about things like accessibility, things like designing for people who don't commonly get designed for. And I think it's really important to really step back. And it's good to have that kind of perspective, and it's good to want to, you know, promote that kind of empathy for all people. But when it comes down to, like, what am I going to do about this thing, you got to ask yourself, like, what am I willing to give up in the process? And so first we're going to talk about DEF CON 5. Who's seen War Games? Who remembers the movie War Games? Who are my 80s people? Yes. Love that movie. And the only way that I could think of this was in stages of DEF CON of desperation. So DEF CON 5, like, I'm not so desperate, but I feel like it's kind of the right thing to do. I think when you're at this point in the process, you start with knowing your numbers. I think that will always be helpful to you. Know how many customers you have or how many users you have of your software and be able to speak to some specifics about it. Right now it's like 3% of the American population suffers from some sort of visual impairment. So that's like, what, 3 million people? Now we can start to like build some sort of idea around how many people this affects and how our business or organization needs to relate to that factor. Like, we can start to say, oh yeah, there are people who are customers of ours that we need to care for who deal with this as an issue. Or maybe we've created some software, some experiences that create more problems for them rather than less. So start to know your numbers there. Know the numbers of your customers, know the numbers of the cause that you're caring about, because I think that will be helpful to you in the end. And make the business case for it. Like, what would be better than to be able to say, hey, we are such and such organization, and so I'll use Westfield Insurance as a great example. Let's say Westfield was renamed Leftfield. And Leftfield Insurance only created insurance for left-handed people. Awesome, right? I'm left-handed. Apparently these guys are. I know there's some other lefties in here. But now you've like cornered the market. Have you guys ever heard of a company that only creates insurance for left-handed people? Like, for those of you who are right-handed, try using your scissors with your left hand sometime. It is impossible to do. So like, I think there's ways of starting to carve out what this can mean for organizations in terms of business numbers. Like, we can say, oh, those 3 million blind people. We create experiences that really cater to that group. We can start to build real numbers off of what that market looks like, and what revenue will look like, and what profitability will look like. And I think those things are really important to do when you're talking about how we set goals and how we align to our organization, because you have to be able to speak their language. Getting down to appeal to brand. So I think it's really important that we get back to that mission and vision thing, and that you guys really understand the mission and vision that your organizations are on. And that when you're passionate about a particular cause, that you can map it and speak to how it fits into the brand that you guys are working for. How it appeals to that, how it continues to spread that message and deliver those brand experiences. And I think that's another path into your like senior leadership that says, these are things that are worthy of doing because it either makes sense on the business side or it appeals to brand. You know, now we're starting to talk some similar language again. And then when you're not so desperate, just start planting the seeds. Like, you don't have to solve every problem right away, right? You can start to have some language and some conversation with key people in your organization and start dropping hints of like, hey, we should be concerned about these things. Or start sharing articles where you see other organizations really tackling some of these problems, particularly if they're competitors. And like start to remind people that, oh yeah, other people really care about this cause. I think maybe it's important for us to do that as well. We're going to move on to DEFCON 3, which is, I have some passion around this topic, but I need to be careful how I navigate my organization or my teammates. But I think here's where you really start making the ask. Like, we're going to start, you've identified some key business numbers, or you've identified some brand pillars, and you can start to like put together some conversations with your leadership around, hey, here's some things that I want to do, and here's why I think they make sense for us. When your planning stages come up, whether it's for a project or if you're doing sprint planning and agile stuff, that's where I think you identify those needs there. Like you bring those up to your project or product managers, and you say, hey guys, these are things we really need to be concerned with because they affect our users and in turn affect some of the outcomes that we have as a business. Or you can identify skill gaps. If you have a team of UX designers, but you're kind of thin on the research side or kind of thin on the accessibility side, like that's a great moment to say, hey organization, hey staffing people, here's a skill gap that we have that if we fill it, we'll be able to use across the organization and get lots of benefit from. And then like show the results from your research or from your testing. Like do a better job of evangelizing the work that you've done and the contributions that you've made as individuals, and get people understanding the why behind it. Especially if you're able to get findings that point to the particular issue that you're trying to push forward. But DEFCON 5, DEFCON 5 is my favorite because it usually fits in with the way that I work anyways, which is why I usually get in trouble. When ask for forgiveness, like the old saying of ask forgiveness, not permission. And I think it's really important in spaces like this when we're talking about designing for difference and accounting for a whole world of people who usually aren't necessarily accounted for. I think you just do it. And this may mean you're working longer hours than normal. If you're normal 40-ish hours or whatever, that you get the normal part of your job done, but you're hyper passionate about solving this one problem for this one particular kind of user, it's on you to put in those extra hours. If your organization's not giving it to you, that's great, I understand it, don't complain. If you're actually super passionate about it, go do the work anyways. Don't make it about your compensation, don't make it about the agreement that you have with your employer about how many hours you should or shouldn't be working. Go do the job. And then the other side of that is, if it's better for those edge cases, most of the time it's better for your target user. So if you're able to improve those accessibility problems that other people are having, you're already, there's a natural ramification that you're going to improve the experience for your target users too. And again, show your results. If you're going to go ahead and just do this stuff, and you get the kind of results you were looking for, really make sure that you get that stuff in front of the right people and start to make that case for hey, I know I did this without asking, but this was a good thing for our organization, and I want to talk to you about how we can do this more, because I think we'll only see more benefit. And then outcomes. I think ultimately when we do a lot of these things, we will work on building empathy inside our organization, either for our teammates or for each other, because now we're getting down to some things that we really care about and the kind of work that we want to do. But we're also building increased amounts of empathy for our customers and the people who we're serving outside of the office. We're getting increased engagement. You're really going to drive into the work that you do, and hopefully that plays out in the engagement with your customers and the people around you. You're building a more inclusive brand. You're able to take a step back and work with your marketing department in your C-suite to say hey, these are tangible ways that we're showing the public that we actually do care about people. We're not just talking a good game, we're actually stepping up and doing the work that we're talking about. And then for you as individuals, a much higher degree of confidence. Take action. I can't ask that of you guys enough. If you're excited about something and you want to do something, take action and try to move that forward. You will fail sometimes, you'll fall on your face, but honestly I think that's actually where the confidence comes from. Because I think what you will learn is, hey, if I take a shot and I fall on my face, you'll learn that you can actually survive falling on your face, which I think is the biggest key there. Your confidence isn't going to come from getting it right all the time. Your confidence is going to come from saying, oh, that fall wasn't so bad. I can actually do this. And then ultimately, I think doing work like this, and the reason it's important is because it comes from your heart, but it's rooted in reality. You want to pursue some of these passions because you really care deeply about these people and you want to see their needs taken care of. But you can do that in a way that is rooted in real data, a real business sense, and a real agreement between the organization and the customer. And what I want for you guys going away from here and after hearing this a couple of things. I want you to keep attacking this stuff with the passion that you have. Use your heart. Like, don't let the organization beat the heart out of your work. Like, if you really care about something and you really care about people, like, do that. And that leads to the authenticity that I always want in the organizations that I work for and the people that I consult with. Like, be who you are and bring all of that to the table every single day. Because I think that's when you're going to be the most fulfilled at work. And I think that's when you're going to offer the best parts of yourself to the organization. And I can't ask that for you guys enough. Before I get done, a couple of things. We're going to step back a couple of slides. We'll just stay here. So we've hit on a couple of different topics, and before we get into Q&A stuff, have a couple of giveaways. So one of the things that we've talked about is like taking some risks. Who here is like deathly afraid of risks? Like who here you're just like risk averse, like there's no way that I'm going to be doing anything. Anybody in here that feels that way? No? You guys are all risk takers? Okay, I expect to see like tons of stuff coming out of this of like, you guys just throwing down and flipping tables at everyone. Like, I can't wait for that. You guys are my people. Who's new to a leadership role? Anybody here? What? Wendy, my friend. So Wendy and I used to work together at Westfield before she moved over to OE Connection. Wendy, here is Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. Brené is one of my favorite authors. I think that will do well for you as you try to grow in leadership.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Dare to Lead by Brené Brown. She's a social worker from Texas who speaks to vulnerability and fear. She's phenomenal. I can't recommend her enough. She has a TED Talk that will just blow you away. Who has a fear of not getting things right or perfection? Like who's our type A personalities here? Lots of you guys. Awesome. Let's go with birthdays. Anybody born in June of that group? Okay. First part of the month? The 11th?
I'm on the 22nd.
20. So I'm born June 1st, so this goes to this guy. Brave, not perfect. Another good book and a good resource for saying like, hey, here's how I can move things forward, but not necessarily have to get things right before we push it on. And then this is for my DEF CON 5 people. Who here's been fired? Ever from an organization? Yes! All right, you guys survived that one. So who got fired for reasons that they thought were like, I stood up for something and I did it, like I did it right. All right, we're down to all three of you guys, okay. Who got fired most recently? 2012. 2012?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Well, we don't know if I quit or was fired.
Yes! And Scott, I know you, I know your situation. I'm gonna go with Ryan on this one. And sorry, baby, for the language, The Subtle Art of Not Giving Up. A good book, a good confidence builder. I think you're gonna like that one. And then lastly, like, okay, last one before we get into some Q&A stuff. Let's see how we're doing on time. Who's like an unapologetic bubblegum pop music fan? Like, not afraid to say it at all. Like, I love this. Well, man, I don't even have to ask them. So this book is an interesting one. It might surprise you guys. Hindsight, Justin Timberlake.
Oh, really? We read the book.
What you may not know about this book that I found to be super interesting, that actually Scott had let me in on. There's one of the most well-known design organizations in the world called Pentagram. And the designer by the name of Michael Beirut. They did all the design work and the layout for this book. It's a beautiful, beautiful, well laid out, well thought through book, and I think you're gonna like it. So this is for you, and I hope you're banging this in Justin Timberlake the whole way home today. Yeah, you're welcome. So questions, let's talk about some of the content we talked through. Let's talk about goal setting, let's talk about alignment, let's talk about DEF CON. You guys have any questions right now? Yeah, go for it. What's your name?
I'm Jackie Greenfield.
Jackie, nice to meet you.
I'm wondering when or if do you bring that legal aspect of things up for accessibility?
The legality around it.
Legality. Yeah.
Do you have a specific problem that you're talking about?
No, I work for an agency, so I work for a lot of different companies, but just in general, trying to, do you want to try and generally try to do both, like the legal and the experience? But I'm kind of curious in your take on how you bring that up.
So with a company like Westfield, who has a lot at stake when it comes to the legality around the things that we do. We will take those things very seriously. And fortunately, our Chief Digital Officer, Matt Lehman, right out of the gate was like, we have a particular accessibility standard that we must hit for compliance purposes. I think when you start introducing that word compliance, like people start to listen. And I think that's a really critical thing. So if you can start to understand what those needs are from a legal perspective, they're only going to help your business case. So I think use those as much as you can. Yeah? Yeah.
I want to know a little bit more about red roots.
About which part?
Red roots.
I'm sorry. Try to think of a good. Anybody else have an example? Can you ask the question again?
I want to know a little bit more about red roots. Red roots.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Red root is like a direct direction to the, but I don't know much about that, so that's why I'm thinking
Okay. How many people in here have experienced retros before in space? Okay. Can anybody offer up can someone give an example of what a good retro has felt like? Like, what were some of the topics you covered? Go ahead, Scott.
So, excuse me while I remove my drum. So I've been, to give you a little background, I've been embedded in agile environments for about 8 years at software companies, startup companies specifically. So I'm a certified Scrum Master too, so I have a little bit more technical background. We always do after action reviews, and we do it in kind of 2 capacities. We do a start, stop, continue. We say like, okay, what did we do good this time? What can we do better? What should we continue doing? And we really try to change the process every single 2 weeks. We're literally saying, did this tool work? Did it not work? Should we be using it? Should we not be using it? We're very open. We consider ourselves like a tool concept. We're okay to switch tools. We're okay to switch processes. We're very open to, if it's not working, get rid of it. We do that with our documentation too. A lot of times I feel like we map the documentation and I ask people, did you use this? Did this serve you? Was there any value in this? If people aren't reading it, people aren't looking at it, get rid of it. There's no reason to do it. So it's really, I think Jay hit on something really square, and that's shared understanding. If your documents and your tools and your communication, if you're translating that deep understanding into shared understanding, then you're firing on all cylinders. So
do we take user input for the red roots? Because how a user will directly reach on the destination, so we don't need the distraction in between. So in this, we need the user input.
yeah, so for our retros, we didn't really implement user experience. It was really about the team operation. However, when I Scrum Master across multiple teams, I would do the teams in the same successive meeting, and then I would have them map. I would draw the timeline out, and I would actually have people map, tell me what your highs were and tell me what your lows were. Because a lot of times if you're working with a coworker and you're like, man, that person just gave me a ton of extra work this sprint, and that was a low for you, what you don't realize and what you don't hear is how the other person might say, wow, Jay really helped me this sprint, and that was a high for me. So it really balances you out. So when you start to hear that from other people, you feel better about not being on track with what you wanted to accomplish. So it's really important to have that communication amongst your team. That's all. Yeah.
Anything else? Any other questions? All right, go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about ways to get alignment. What are some of the common barriers, like from outside of you, to alignment that are challenges for you?
Lack of clear goals. I think that's a major one. If you don't have the right direction, people are going to head in their own directions and think they have their own goals that they're working towards. And that's why it's so important for leadership to constantly evangelize and ask for feedback around how clear they are speaking about the goals that they have. And that's why KPIs come into play, because they become measurable. They're like objective in nature. It doesn't stay in this weird subjective space.
I suppose there have to be very good KPIs, they probably generalized.
Yeah.
To the point where you can't take action on those.
Mm-hmm.
One of ours is
Yeah.
we have no evidence of that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what we do is very minimal impact to that. And so using that's not something we can take action to.
Well, Jamie, why don't you give them a little context and tell them where you work and what you do?
Oh, I work for Westfield also, Westfield Insurance. I'm a product manager and we're developing our customer portal. So it's very important for us that we measure as a corporation our NPS score, which there's much debate in the industry as a whole as to whether that's really a valuable metric to measure anyways. But NPS really kind of, whether you would promote that company to another person has a lot of influence from a lot of different areas and not on a specific thing. Unless you're asking specifically about that situation, it's not a good metric. So pushing back, and we've done a lot of that, pushing back to our hierarchy. Well, what is the actual business value that we are trying to measure by that? So getting actual measurable things that we can attack. So I can, reducing the number of calls into our claim center, then my system, that's a measurable thing that we can do.
And one of the things I liked about what Jamie did there was she took something that was a little more ambiguous, like a totality of NPS, which is the totality of experiences, and whittled it. She said, that's not going to work for me. I can't rely solely on that. I need something else that's a little more specific to the work that I'm actually doing to see if I'm getting success with it. And so, Jamie works on that, communicates that back to the team, communicates that up, and now we're all starting to speak a similar language. And that's where I think that it can't stop at oh, NPS just isn't good enough. Because Jamie could have just settled there and been done with the conversation. Rather than doing that, she did something and found a metric that did it. So I think that's the key component of that conversation. And then shared understanding, establish that common language as much as possible. Whether it's the customers you're working on, whether it's a method that you're using, whatever it is, make sure people understand the things that you're saying. And if you feel like they may not, ask, follow up and say, hey, does anybody wonder what I'm saying? Because people will get in front of you and nod their heads because they don't want you to think that they're stupid. So create good space and good conversation around, hey, let's make sure that we're actually speaking the same language.
Just kind of follow up on that. So we've tried all these things. When do we know it's not going to work?
When you know it's not going to work?
Yeah. It's time to
That
move
depends on how quickly you're willing to give. And that, that's when for me, that's when it comes back to that DEF CON conversation. How invested are you in it? How many different ways are you willing to try to get that thing to work? Have you exhausted all of your resources? Have you tried to make as many partners in the process as you can? How big of an impact do you actually think it has? I think that sort of balancing act of when do I quit, when do I move on? Maybe your ultimate goal is, trying to think of a good example. So there's socioeconomic impact that happens with a lot of the work that you do. In technology, it's easy to assume that everybody has access to everything all the time, right? Not necessarily the case. So if you take a look at somebody who doesn't necessarily have access to some of the basic things that they need in order to do the things that your software helps them to do, and that's like a torch you want to carry, and one that you're trying to really push forward, regardless of what organization that you're at. If that organization is not the right place for you to do that, maybe it's time to figure out where the right organization is to do it. It doesn't mean you stop fighting for those people. It means maybe you take up that torch in a different space. So I think there's different ways of navigating that.
So you're saying maybe broader, this can be personal as well as the vision and values of the organization.
Right.
And you're also saying this is a long-term, it's not short-term.
Yeah. And I also think something that gets really interesting there is it can be hard to be patient with this stuff. Focus on what progress looks like. Taking that next step as an organization is a big deal. And that next step may not meet your individual standards for what you think it needs to look like, but it can mean a lot for what the organization is doing. Doing something that they didn't even think about or talk about at all before. Let's say it wasn't even on their radar, right? But now you're hearing conversation around it, and you're hearing some shared terminology around it. You may not actually be living it out yet and delivering products or services that actually do those things, but you've taken a step forward. And so it depends on how much patience you have and where you think that organization is going to go.
Drive something like that, they're making a clear distinction to us to, within this period of time, we're going to try X, Y, and Z to move that forward, and we'll check in along that process and regularly, you know, make sure that's
Yeah.
and we've done that several times, and that part of what retro is to make sure that, okay, those KPIs we had last time, how did that work? Did we get better, or we chose to change? If we didn't, we did.
Yeah.
So,
Just after that is, I think where you're going, Jay, is the organization ready for that?
Yeah.
If they're not, it's okay to put that on the shelf, continue your cause, and then go back to it at some point.
Yeah, so something that Scott and I like to talk about a lot is the difference between fast lane work and slow lane. Like, what is going to take a longer investment over time to really like move the needle with? What are small actionable things we can do right now to try to make a difference? Yeah.
I would challenge you to go smaller, and I'll give you a great example. I'm actually adopted, and I adopted a little baby girl, and one of my slow lane things is to change the way we do adoption in the United States. I can't change that, but what I can do is meet with people who want to adopt, and it has a huge impact on how I communicate that, how that works. So go smaller if you can, make an impact on the scale.
Well, thanks for listening, guys. I appreciate it. Find me online if you guys ever want to hang out, grab coffee, chat, or whatever, on Instagram, on Twitter. Love to hang out sometime, pick your brains, like to learn from you guys too. Thank you. None of my coworkers heckled me. I don't know what to do.
Good feedback.
Thank you. Oh, yes. Well, I usually do there.
I can't sleep, I gotta get up. Sure. So, we used to recruit students. Yeah.
Are you staying in this room for the next one too?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's probably why I came here the first.
last year,
Hey, how are ya?
It was good. There were some technical difficulties, especially towards the end. The audio got a little funny, but it was right out there. Yeah, it had its monitor, two big screens. It was definitely good. Yeah.
E-commerce, so more on the marketing side. But I started
Do you come to this every
as a
year?
graphic designer, so I guess you guys played a big role with that. What do you like student rate?
Right.
It's awesome. It's actually a very unique position. I find it to be the best job in the whole part because I'm in art. Okay. A resident assistant for the overall. My main responsibility is at the associate rec center. So essentially, I run the place where folks can go during their downtime to eat or watch TV or things like that, or play games. We have like
Yeah, why don't we just move that right in front?
so So I've actually gotten to meet friends from all over the world. I've gotten to work with one of I had this customer from like 4 different countries. So I got to learn a lot about what is really going on in other countries compared to what we're doing.
So then do you live there for the summer? Work there?
I grew up in Huron, Ohio, which is like 15 minutes down the road from Stevens. So I have been fortunate to have my folks have that opportunity while I work there because there's a heck of a lines
I marked all the ones that Jane was going to, so this one we're in this room again.
I've seen them. My family goes and people like stay in one of the hotels in there, and so
Yeah,
I've driven by
I
them
thought
and
maybe
seen
it might be
that.
interesting, but it's kind of risky to.
I'm sure it's fun, you know, for college age kids.
That one, but I think for this one, she's going to do ethical design.
The international folks, I don't know the technical
Insurance goes AI.
great and please and thank you and this may I have. So like golf,
Yeah.
basketball, like can I have ball? I'm like, what kind of ball do we have? We have baseball, volleyball, basketball.
This actually, both of these, like this one too, good
And it
customer
always
relationship.
irks people when I ask my friends, of course when I basketball, you should know that. It's like,
Now I should know that.
it's like, I don't assume things. If I assume things, I'm not doing a job. But then,
Yeah, my neighbors.
when I'm out, like, one of the main desks, I have to handle, their housing deposit and the board. I have to do all the, policies, so, yeah, like, there's multiple sides to the job. The one thing I can't, like, I physically can't do is go
I
we need to separate you two.
lucky if I get up this morning.
Just like typical problems. And ironically, the only class that it kind of sort of failed in undergrad was an RA training class. It's like they didn't like the ideas that I had so much so that they're like, we talked on the class for I'm like, seriously, wow. I was in
Two people behind me, maybe.
Gonna cause me there to take, a bad mark on my record just because you don't like what I have it.
Any place is open.
But anywho, that was here. Yeah, okay. That was here.
I think I'm going there too.
Okay, so then it's like, I go back home, and once my job comes and I'm here, it's so hot. I'm crazy. They're kind of just making
Here to memorize their ideas.
And then one makes a donut cookie. Oh, sorry.
It's okay, no, it's all your fault.
You're on the way.
I guess you gotta go now.
Yes.
Wants to do the other one. It's very specific.
Okay, I'm not gonna lie. At first I thought, automated.
Yeah.
My father-in-law is mechanical engineer for Scholastic and that.
Okay.
So that would probably help him. But the thing is though, my father-in-law is a learner. He does not like to do technology. So he's constantly asking myself and I think I don't know exactly. My husband is a software developer. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm here is to, expand my knowledge because when he starts to talk in his technical language, so I'm trying to learn a tad bit about Rackspace over the past few years, so I can help, if need be, on the website for
Sorry. No. The seat is open.
We're gay. We're hardcore judging you.
Forget
One of the other obvious things that I had to just constantly fight for is, of course, accessibility, inclusivity, diversity, all of that.
Working on right now.
And I have been at I want to do 2 or 3 academic library positions, but ultimately, I think a lot of them, academics who are very set in their ways, and they just look at that and now, I mean, legally, they can't really say that, but I could just tell based on the looks of it, on paper, when they see, all this, they're not expecting someone that has a mobility issue, but I see them go, why there's so many like, oh my gosh,
One year I was sitting by Jen, she said just the industry in general has a hard time bringing in these ideas. She's typically like wants to get into like the information just to get that idea adopted in the library system is not like pushing over uphill.
Yeah, that's what I need to try and do, just try and get the foot in one of my former supervisors here, his name is Peter Lacey, at work when I was in number one, Georgia. It was like, why everybody's a singer. Well, I was doing we went to a jar back in I had a co-teacher when I had stayed here. And that, when I was on the class, I was often walkers. And my co-teacher, the representation completely different. We had training starters. He had to get one for the first time while I was studying. So that was I appreciate all of the pages in the libraries for that because I thought because I had applied at public libraries along with academic libraries, as soon as I was in Dial for almost 3 years. So it's just, I do all of these and get there and get their awareness, all of this good stuff.
Job here?
But it doesn't close until the 1st of April.
So that means they won't even start looking at resumes till April.
Yeah, unfortunately. But I had talked to at the conference that we were on, and then she also got me in touch with unfortunately, we're still trying to convince the administrative board to hire more people to work.
Thanks for coming. Excuse me. Standing room. This is crazy.
This is crazy. And standing room only for accessibility. I love it.
That's very cool.
It is cool. But I'm gonna
keep checking our website.
This is so crazy. Standing room only.
We were in each of the last one, and then we were like, oh, okay.
Yeah, no, I was over there and I was like, ah, I should have just stayed.
I have a chair built into that thing, but.
No, that's not gonna be comfy though, right? And you're not gonna have a table, yeah, no. It's all good.
I haven't been in this room since grad school.
Oh yeah? I didn't go to school here, but I know a lot of people who have. A lot of my team went to school here.
Oh, here's a headshot. I've been to school twice.
Oh really?
Undergrad and grad.
Oh, okay. All right. What'd you get your grad degree in?
MLAS.
Okay. MLAS. Wait. Master of Library and Architecture? No, wait.
Information science.
Information science. I was so close. Gotta get it.
It's all good. My family's like, what do you do? What is that title?
Right. Yeah, I got a master's in human-computer interaction, and I'm always like, look, it's about humans, it's about the computers, it's about the interaction.
That's very.
It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just kind of funny.
That's very neat. I've never heard of it.
Really? HCI?
Like that. No.
Oh yeah, master's in HCI is pretty common, I think.
Where did you get that degree at?
Carnegie Mellon.
That would be fine.
Georgia Tech also does it, and University of Michigan has an HCI degree. There's quite a few.
That would be why I was like, okay.
No, yeah, not here.
I've never even heard of that. Like in Ohio anywhere. No.
Yeah, I don't know if there's specific to HCI in Ohio, but again, I think it's very similar to the Kent program, honestly. It's Kent UXD, the
my husband, he's a software developer for the towing industry. So
the what industry?
Towing.
Oh, okay.
So whenever he starts to talk text, I'm like,
yeah.
Okay, I need to expand my own horizons, see if I can help a library, come out America with something.
So do you work for the library?
In graduate school, I actually worked here.
Oh, okay. All right.
I've been out for like a year and a half, almost 2 years. Visit.
Oh, yeah.
It was fun because I worked like 5 to 4 jobs here. So
oh, wow.
It was amazing hands-on experience while I was still in school.
Can people hear me if I do not mic up?
Yeah.
Okay. I guess I should have asked, can anybody not hear me? But then it's like a send question. If you can't hear me, you can't answer. Thanks for your patience with our technical difficulties. I'm here to talk about content, context, users, and inclusive design for World Information Architecture Day. I do have a bad habit of speaking pretty quickly, but you will get the slides. I will put them on my website once I solve those technical difficulties. So I'll start with an introduction, tell you a little bit about me and why I'm here. I'll briefly go over some key terms: digital accessibility, inclusive design, and universal design. I'll spend about 10 minutes on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or the WCAG, which are the de facto industry standard. And I will also explain the POUR model, P-O-U-R, which stands for perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. I'll then transition into talking about information architecture framework, content, context, and users, and how those terms map to inclusive design. Finally, I will wrap things up and then take questions. I am kind of an old-fashioned presenter, so I will ask that you save your questions for the end. And I'm going to remember to set a timer so I don't go too long. A couple disclaimers before we begin. Yes, as I'm sure you either know or can easily find out, I work for KeyBank up in Cleveland. The lawyers make me say I do not in any way represent the company. I'm only representing myself. There's some, speaking of legal, there's some legal aspects to accessibility and inclusive design, particularly around the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, or Section 508. I have a general understanding of the law. I cannot give legal advice. Finally, this is an informational presentation, not a how-to. So if you want to know how to solve accessibility problems, that's a different presentation. Who am I? Why am I here? This is a famous phrase, or maybe an infamous phrase if you prefer. Does anybody in the audience remember who infamously said this?
Admiral Stockdale.
There you go, Admiral James Stockdale. He was the vice presidential running mate for H. Ross Perot, the third-party candidate back in 1992. And he opened the vice presidential debate with this immortal phrase, who am I, why am I here? It became something of a meme before we had memes. So who am I really? I'm Joshua Randall. I'm a user experience designer and user researcher at KeyBank. I appointed myself accessibility champion because nobody else wanted the job. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, which goes to show you never know where your career will take you. And I have a master's degree in user experience design from this fine institution. I just graduated in December 2018, so I'm very happy to be here speaking to you now. I've worked as an IT business analyst for 20 years, mostly at big Cleveland companies, Progressive, American Greetings, Medical Mutual, Sherwin-Williams, and now KeyBank. Although at KeyBank, I am now in the UX department. I've made that career transition. I started getting interested in UX about 5 years ago, and I started attending a lot of events like this one, World Usability Day. I joined as a member of User Experience Professionals Association, and I'm now on the board. So I strongly encourage anyone who's interested, do that networking and go to those meetups and events. It really does matter. My focus on digital accessibility is a little over a year old, starting when I was at Sherwin-Williams and continuing at KeyBank. Why am I here? I'm here because several months ago, while I was sitting in a hotel room at a conference in Las Vegas, I started rereading the book Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond, otherwise known as the Polar Bear book for obvious reasons. As I read the first few chapters, I was struck by the overlap between information architecture and inclusive design. I started drawing pictures and boxes and arrows, and pretty soon my paper looked like the stereotypical crazy conspiracy theory that you see in TV and movies. This is just a glimpse of what it was. Come back to that later. So let's review. Why am I here? I was at the most exciting city in the world, or one of them, and then I was rereading a textbook? What could be the explanation for this behavior? Well, we're all a little nerdy to be here on a Saturday to discuss information architecture. Thank you for coming to this conference. Thank you for coming to this session. Let's dive in. I want to go over some terms because the way I see it, inclusive design fits into accessibility broadly defined. I mentioned some of the legal apparatus that we have, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act, which applies to federal government agencies and those who do business. So these are specific, narrow regulations that you have to follow. Take a broader view, you start talking about web accessibility, making the web more usable by people with different abilities. Take a broader view than that, you're talking about digital accessibility, expanding beyond the web to other electronic documents, mobile apps, and so on. Take an even broader view and you get to inclusive design, which is considering the range of human diversity when creating designs. And perhaps the broadest view of all is something called universal design, which is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Universal design comes out of real-world, physical world architecture, but some of its ideas apply really nicely to web design. I'm going to try and stay in this kind of inclusive design sweet spot in this presentation. But I do want to also look at the definition of digital accessibility, and here's the official definition from the Web Accessibility Institute, or Web Accessibility Initiative, I should say. So, the ability of a website, mobile application, or electronic document to be easily navigated and understood by a wide range of users, including those who have visual, auditory, motor, or cognitive disabilities. So again, it's a superset of web accessibility. You're taking it beyond just websites to include mobile apps and things like PDFs or PowerPoint presentations. And notice the phrase, a wide range of users, and we'll keep that in mind when we talk about information architecture. Here's a couple of definitions of inclusive design. The first is from the Inclusive Design Research Center at the Ontario College of Art and Design, or OCADU. And you can see that it's more broad than digital accessibility. The second definition is from the website inclusivedesign.org. which is a product of the Paciello Group, one of the leading accessibility consulting firms. And I really want to focus in on this concept of permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. We'll come back to that in a few moments. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. We have these because when we want to act on the idea of inclusive design and digital accessibility, we need something concrete to refer to. So the WCAG, as they're often referred to, are a set of principles, guidelines, and success criteria established by the World Wide Web Consortium. That's the same group that puts out standards like HTML, which is obviously what underlies the web. And the WCAG has become the industry standard for web accessibility. Now, they had been on version 2.0 since 2008, and in June of 2018, they went to version 2.1 to address some gaps around mobile technology, which, after all, barely existed in 2008, low vision, and cognitive disabilities. There's 4 principles at the top of the WCAG: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those form the mnemonic POUR, P-O-U-R. Those 4 principles break down into 13 guidelines that are numbered with digits like 1.1 and 1.2 and so on. The guidelines then further break down into detailed success criteria, and those would have 3 digits like 1.1.1 or 4.1.2. I'm going to stay at the top level, the principle level, the POUR mnemonic: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Again, I have other presentations that go into the lower levels of detail. So let's talk about those principles in a little bit more depth. Perceivable. It means that people can perceive the information and the user interface components regardless of what senses they have or don't have. Or to put this another way, perceivable means we make our information available to many different senses, including hearing and touch. Operable. It means that people can act on the interface components. They can navigate the information space, they can explore it, and they can transact on it. We give people multiple ways to determine where they are, and to get to where they're going, and to find content once they arrive. Understandable means just what it says. That people can understand the information being presented. It means we write using plain language, and we apply consistent structure to what we write. Robust means that people can continue to access our content even when the underlying technology changes as we know it will. 15 years ago, nobody had a smartphone. 10 years ago, nobody was talking to Siri or Alexa. 5 years ago, nobody had a smart watch. But by adhering to standards like HTML and WCAG, we can bake in forwards compatibility for future technologies, whatever they may be. When we look at the words that the Web Accessibility Initiative uses to describe the POUR principles, we find information, navigation, and content. And those are all words that are obviously also important to the field of information architecture. So speaking of information architecture, here is the information architecture framework from the Polar Bear book. It's your very classic Venn diagram of overlapping circles. This is on page 32 of the 4th edition if you want to follow along at home. So we'll talk about them kind of from left to right: content, context, and users. So the content, the information itself, and its presentation are essential to our ability to understand the stuff that's on the website or in the app. Context. Now, the diagram in the Polar Bear book and the words on this Venn diagram here refer to the business context in which information architecture operates. And at first I thought I was going to have to shoehorn context into inclusive design. But if you read the text that goes with the diagram, so it's on page 35 for those playing at home, this is kind of a lengthy quote, but bear with me here. You also need to understand the contextual differences imposed by the channels that the user will be using to interact with your organization. Will they be experiencing your services primarily via apps or mobile phones, or via a website in a desktop-based browser? Both platforms have things they can do well and things they can't. For example, smaller screens mean less space, which in turn implies shorter labels and navigation menus. Devices with small screens are also used at different times and places than those with larger screens. End quote. So that paragraph points us toward context of use and the constraints of technology, which are going to fit very nicely with inclusive design, as we will see. And finally, users. We've got the words audience and experience, which are essential elements of design in general and inclusive design in particular. Only by understanding the people who use our products can we build an effective information architecture for them. So I titled this talk Content, Context, Users, and Inclusive Design, but I actually want to tackle it in reverse order, starting with users. So it'll be users, context, content, and inclusive design. So we're going to talk about our audience, and with an eye towards inclusive design, we will talk about how many people have disabilities and why we should care. We'll talk about context of use and how situational disabilities affect all of us. We'll also talk about how stress is a part of our context. And we'll talk about content and how it's still the king, and why structure is so important to inclusive design. Let's start with users. 15.3% of people in the United States have an impairment that can affect their ability to use digital products. Don't just think about visually impaired people when you think about accessibility. People with difficulty grasping objects might have difficulty using a mouse or a touch screen. And people with cognitive difficulties like attention deficit disorder or dyslexia may have difficulty understanding content without strong information architecture behind it or strong structure. The worldwide percentage is similar, 15% of people or over 1 billion people. We tend to focus on our customers who are affected by disabilities, but don't forget your employees as well. Almost everything we do in the workplace now has a digital component to it. We need to make that accessible so people can contribute. There's a self-interested reason to care about accessibility. Bruce Tognazzini, who's a former Apple designer and now at Nielsen Norman Group, writes, "We will all have disabilities eventually unless we die first." That's a morbid way to put it, but he's absolutely right. The aging population is increasingly using the internet. We need to design for them and for our future selves. Finally, beyond permanent disabilities, there's temporary and situational disabilities as well. But before we talk about those, let me ask a big question. Why should we care? Well, it's the right thing to do. Okay, maybe that's not compelling enough. Accessibility improves your brand. People's opinions can be shared openly, freely, and vastly. If your organization is doing right by its customers, that will bubble up, and vice versa. If people have a bad experience, like they can't add items to a shopping cart, they will tweet about it. But maybe only after they abandon a site. A survey in the United Kingdom found that 71% of customers with disabilities will click away from a website that's difficult to use, never to return. Accessibility is a quality of work issue. You've heard the phrase, whatever is worth doing at all is worth doing well. I think that applies to digital work just as much as it does to physical labor. And accessibility is usability. If up to 15% of people can't use something because you didn't take accessibility into account, then arguably you're not doing it well. Accessibility affects your business-to-business work. Many clients, especially government contractors or government agencies themselves, have accessibility requirements. And if you lack accessibility, you could become less competitive, you might not even get the bid. Some clients will require something called a VPAT, a voluntary product accessibility template. If you don't fill one out, or you fill it out and you have too many negative marks on it, you simply won't get the business. Accessibility helps with search engine optimization, or SEO. David Berman, who's an accessibility expert, writes that the most frequent visitor to your website is blind, deaf, and has the cognitive abilities of a 4-year-old. He's referring to the Google spider that indexes sites. It can't see, it can't hear, and it's not very bright. But the Google spider loves accessibility. And Google's SEO guidelines closely match the web accessibility guidelines. For example, you should put an HTML title element that is short and unique on every web page. This will help your SEO and will also help people using screen readers or other assistive technologies. Accessibility supports low bandwidth users. So we're sitting here in this high bandwidth environment, and it's easy to imagine that everywhere is like this. But the reality is that in the United States, 64% of people lack fast broadband. I think the worldwide percentage is something like 80% lack fast broadband. People who experience a slow site or one with a complex process, 75% of those people will no longer buy from that site if it's an e-commerce site. Now the good news is that the same updates that make a site more accessible for people with disabilities also make it more usable for people on low bandwidth connections. And finally, accessibility reduces legal risk. The Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, has been pretty consistently interpreted by the courts to apply to websites, not just physical buildings. There have been thousands of website-related cases brought under the ADA, and the trend has been increasing exponentially. The cost of an accessibility lawsuit can be high. In 2008, Target settled with the National Federation of the Blind for $6 million in damages and $4 million in legal fees. In April of 2018, Morgan Stanley was sued, and the plaintiff is asking for $9 million. And on January 3rd of 2019, a plaintiff brought a class action lawsuit against the website of the singer Beyonce, alleging that it's inaccessible to people with visual impairments. The plaintiff is seeking both an injunction to force the website to be updated and monetary damages to compensate the class members. So there you have a variety of reasons to care about accessibility, from the most high-minded to the most legalistic. Let's come back to that second part of the IA framework, context. This is a chart from Microsoft's Inclusive Design Toolkit, which shows different modes of perception: touch, see, hear, and speak, or different modes of perception and interaction, I should say. And it illustrates that you can have a permanent, temporary, or situational disability affecting each of these modes. For example, if you have a permanent disability with seeing, you may be blind. If you have a temporary disability with seeing, you may have cataracts. If you have a situational disability with seeing, you may be a distracted driver, or what I think is a better example, you're in bright sunlight trying to read your smartphone screen. Another example, if you have a permanent disability with hearing, you may be deaf. A temporary disability with hearing might be because you have an ear infection, and a situational disability could be because you're a bartender in a loud bar, or you just need to keep your volume down. Both of these situational disabilities involve someone's context of use, where they are and what the environment is like as they try to understand some information. Situational disabilities are common, particularly on mobile devices. High contrast mode, closed captioning, and other assistive technology originally designed for people with permanent disabilities ends up helping everyone. Continuing our tour of context, we know that technology was an important piece of that as well. So we'll talk about assistive technology, or AT, the general term for tools that people with disabilities use to access digital media and digital content. Although as accessibility expert Sarah Hendren puts it, all technology is assistive technology. The monitor on which you view this presentation and the paper that I refer to while giving the presentation are supplementing our abilities to hear and to remember. The eyeglasses or contacts that a lot of us wear are supplementing our ability to see. Without my eyeglasses, I can't read the words on my paper or the screen. I can't make out the faces of anyone in this room unless I were to stand uncomfortably close to you. In the world of digital accessibility, the most common assistive technologies we work with on the software side are screen readers, voice recognition, and screen magnifiers, virtual screen magnifiers. On the hardware side, keyboards, mice, and pointing devices are our most common pieces of assistive technology. Yep, your keyboard is a great piece of assistive technology. And I think in today's day of voice-activated interfaces, we need to think about headsets, microphones, and recording devices as also pieces of essential assistive technology. Now, when you think about the technological context of use in conjunction with information architecture, it can lead you to better design. Let's think about the humble alarm clock. You set it for a particular time, and it alerts you when that time arrives. But consider the context of use of that alarm clock, and remember the modes of interaction and perception from the Microsoft chart. Most of the time when an alarm clock goes off, we can't see it because it's dark and our eyes are closed. So the fact that it says, 6:30 a.m. on the screen is not particularly helpful to that mode of perception. It's a situational disability with seeing. So if the only thing the alarm does is light up or change colors, we might not even perceive it. We can add sound to the alarm, and that works for a lot of us. But some of us are heavy sleepers, this guy. Or maybe we're somewhere noisy during the day, which is a situational disability with hearing. We can add haptics, like vibration, to the alarm, and that will probably work when light and sound don't. Apple has done a good job with their alarm, integrating sight, sound, and touch on the watch at least, and the phone will also vibrate if you have it close enough that you feel that. Somebody might have a situational disability with touch, like nerve damage. So there's no perfect solutions, only trade-offs. My point is you need to consider multiple contexts of use and multiple technological constraints when designing. And ask yourself these questions. Where will the user be in what surroundings when they attempt to interact with the information? And remember that permanent, temporary, or situational disabilities might be a factor. Another time when context of use becomes incredibly important is when people are under stress. We know that stress eats up your cognitive resources. Your mind has severely reduced processing power when under stress. So it's vitally important that we present information to you in an easy to understand way. The same guideline applies to inclusive design. Now, stressors don't have to be life or death. We all have times when we're running late or when technology isn't working the way it should, like when you're trying to do a PowerPoint presentation. In these everyday moments, we appreciate good design and good information architecture. For example, with the help of the tech support gentleman, we were relatively easily able to figure out how to change the setting in PowerPoint to get it to fit on the screen, thanks to some pretty decent design. But we also curse the opposite. We curse bad design and bad information architecture when we're running late or we're under stress because we're in a hurry and we're already frustrated. We wish somebody would have thought about that when they were building the thing. And let's take the recommendation of Eric Meyer and Sarah Wachter-Becher and call these situations stress cases and not edge cases. An edge case, people say, well, it's an edge case. You can ignore it for now. Well, for now usually turns into forever, and you never address it. But a stress case, I think, is a little less likely to be ignored because all of us experience stress. Let's move on to the final part of the IA framework, content. As I put it in the slide title, content is still the king of the U in core, still the king of understanding, or understandable. An easy way to achieve understandability is to use plain language. Write the way you would speak to someone. If you have to use jargon, explain what it means. This is basic stuff. Equally important is the structure into which you place your content. Structure is what turns a mass of words and images into information. All of us learned structure in grade school when we made outlines for our 5-paragraph essays. You start with a topic. You break it into main points. Under each of these main points are supporting information. The same approach to structure is critically important for inclusive design. It's why designers and developers need to mark up their content with HTML. Now, I said at the beginning this isn't a how-to presentation, but I can't resist going into this one how-to because for digital accessibility and inclusive design, you have to use proper HTML titles and heading levels. These are your core structural and semantic elements. And they are semantic elements. They are not styling elements. That's what CSS is for. People with visual disabilities who use assistive technologies like screen readers depend upon good structure to navigate the information space. So do people without disabilities, which is why typography and visual design are important. Here's a good example of good structure. The World IA Day webpage for previous years and themes has a top navigation element that shows you where you are. It has a breadcrumb trail that further identifies the path that you took to get here. There's an H1 heading on the page, years and themes, which is the main topic. And each year underneath that heading is an H2 of the form year:theme. So it's consistent, it's simple, it's easy to follow, both for sighted users and for users on assistive technology. And this is what I mean by the importance of structured content. Here's one more example of the importance of structured content. This is a simplified web page with the landmarks on the page labeled. Landmarks are how many people with disabilities navigate a page when using assistive technology. Maybe they hear an announcement from a screen reader, or maybe they feel a different pattern of dots with a braille display, or maybe it's some other assistive technology that hasn't even been invented yet. The structural elements are also important for sighted users. After nearly 30 years of web design, we are intuitively familiar with this structure. You've got a header or a banner at the top. You've got a left-hand navigation. You've got an area in the middle with the main content, maybe some type of web application in it. You've got an area on the right with some complementary information, maybe a form or a search box. And then you've got a footer at the bottom, or it's called content info when you specify it for assistive technology. This is important because if you're using a screen reader like NVDA, non-visual desktop access, Each of the landmark regions can be listed for you, and you can determine which ones are nested inside each other. So in this example, you've got a search form, or a search box nested inside a form, which is nested inside that complementary landmark region. This is how you will navigate and sort of scan this page when you first come across it, in the same way that as a visual user, you would pick out the headings, the subheadings, the things that are in bold or that are offset in some way with white space. That structure is providing a framework that your content sits into, which is why I say that content is still the king. Let's look back at my crazy diagram, where I took the perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, the poor mnemonic, and I connected them to the content, context, and users of the IA framework. So we want to make things perceivable, even to people with sensory impairments, certain types of users. We want to think about the context of use. What's the screen size they're on? What's the glare? What's the noise level? We want to think about how we have structured things. That kind of overlaps with other parts of the framework as well. But that's our content. It needs to be structured in a way that's perceivable. Operable. Again, context of use. Where are you? Can you operate under these conditions? And one of the situational disabilities that I didn't really talk about, but if you remember back to the chart, touch is both a perception mode and a mode of interaction. Well, if you're holding a baby in one hand and your car keys in the other, how are you going to interact with your touch screen? You're probably not. You're probably going to ask Siri instead. So think about that context of use to make things operable under a variety of conditions. Understandable. Here's where IA really plays a role. Navigation, structure, predictability, the way you organize your content, the way you allow people to find it. And finally, we want to have a robust underpinning under everything. We want to adhere to standards to ensure forwards compatibility with future technologies. This is a short presentation, and I've only scratched the surface of information architecture and inclusive design. I hope you were inspired to think about these topics as complementary to each other. So in summary, accessibility is the right thing to do and part of quality. Inclusive design means we put people first and we consider the range of human diversity when designing. One way you can do that is by making your information and content perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And for the best results, you can blend those poor mnemonics with the information architecture framework of content, context of use, and users. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening. I will now take your questions.
It's not a question, but a comment. You mentioned how if you can't see or hear the alarm, but you can feel the vibration. There was also an invention, I don't know it well, but I just know I've heard of it. It was kind of interesting, is if you do a bad habit, it shocks you, which I thought was interesting too. I don't know how successful it is, but it was interesting.
Hopefully a light shock. Yes, over here.
What was it that you said to put on your website when you were speaking about the Google Spider?
Oh, so Google Spider really loves if you have short and unique titles on HTML title elements on every web page. And try to make them something meaningful as opposed to just homepage or web page. Because that's one of the ways that Google kind of decides how relevant your content is and how high it's going to be in the search rankings. Is there a good descriptive title on the page? It's also important for people with visual disabilities using assistive technology, because that's the first thing that will be announced to them when they land on the page, the title of the page. So if the title of the page is blank or basically meaningless, that's not really helpful. Like, where am I? And remember, people deep link into your site all the time. So they don't necessarily navigate their way there. They may just arrive at some page 5 levels deep. Where are they? Yes, in the back row.
Are there any tools that can help, like you did a site or you're working on some site, help you rank and see like how you're scoring when you see a disability, or say, you're going?
Sure. So Good old Google has, in the developer tools, they have a variety of audits that you can do on your page. One of them is accessibility. One of them is for search engine ranking type stuff. There's a usability ranking. That's, again, these are good sort of general ways to get a sense. I wouldn't read too much into the numbers. Like if you score a 67 and I score a 70, like what does that really mean? Who knows? But if you score a 50 and somebody else scores an 80, you probably can start seeing a difference there. This tool listed at the bottom of the screen, Wave, is a specifically for web accessibility evaluation. It's free. It's kind of the granddaddy of all accessibility tools. That is a good way to find some of the very common accessibility problems on a page. Keep in mind, any of these automated tools like Wave, or there's one that number 5 on the list, Q Systems puts out called AXE, A-X-E. They can only detect about 25 to 30% of web content accessibility guideline violations because the other 70 to 75% require some type of human judgment to know. Remember, they're guidelines, they're not rules. They're not necessarily zeros and ones that a computer can detect. I think there was a question over here, yep.
Have you ever conducted any usability testing on assistive technology device?
So the question was usability testing on assistive technology devices. Do you want to know if I used the device for testing or if I evaluated how good the device was?
The evaluation of someone with disability using it.
I have sadly not been able to get to that level of inclusive design maturity, right? I'd love to do UX research where we bring in people using assistive technology devices as part of our research. It's hard enough to recruit people, right? For a normal study, it's even 10 times as hard to recruit people because they may have a very specific setup. Maybe someone's in a wheelchair with a hard-mounted tablet and a fixed orientation, and might be very difficult for that person to get into my usability lab. So I would need to go to them, which in the corporate environment is not always easy. But there are organizations like, if I go back to the previous screen, like some of these, numbers 5, 6, and 7, and 8, some of these big accessibility consulting firms can link you up with people who are using assistive technology. The Cleveland Sight Center, Cleveland Center for Hearing and Speech, they also obviously have connections in the community. So that would be a great way to get FaceTime with, not Apple FaceTime, face-to-face time with people actually using these technologies. Now, some of them you can use for yourself, right? So everybody with an iPhone, you have one of the best screen readers on the market in your iPhone. It's called VoiceOver. Pro tip, make sure you know how to turn it off before you turn it on. But that is an excellent screen reader. You can certainly, and I would encourage you to play around with it yourself a little bit. If you're on a Windows machine, NVDA is a free screen reader. Actually, I think Microsoft now has a built-in one called Narrator, it's decent. Again, it's not the same as actually living with visual impairment every day, but if you close your eyes and try to navigate that way, you can get a flavor for it. Other questions? I thought there was one up here. Okay, here's my contact information. I love talking about this stuff. As I alluded to, I have a variety of other presentations that go more into the how-to around inclusive design and digital accessibility. I am the co-organizer of the Cleveland Accessibility Meetup. We are on Twitter under both I should have put the @ sign, @A11YCLE and #A11YCLE. The A11Y is because the word accessibility is really long, and there's 11 letters between the A and the Y, so that's the shorthand for it. I'm also on the board of UXPA Cleveland, as are a couple other people in this room. If you're interested in UX, please come to those events. If you're interested in accessibility, please come to my meetups. Thank you very much, and I will not stand between you and lunch any longer.
I worked last 3 months of my time. My whole project was trying to make their 100% online library more accessible. I was hard on it though, because I'm doing the next week for what heck I have peace with all.
Can I help you? I can hold your chair steady. Okay.
Thank you so much. You're welcome. It was great.
You too. I'll see you later.
Sir?
Sorry. Hey, are you heading out? Yeah, I'm supposed to go.
Yeah. I would jump on there, or just, look in your class rosters and see if there's anybody else. I would definitely try to, when they do the monthly kind of talks, and then just talk about systems, try to 10 minutes. Great ways to learn a little bit outside the classroom. All the rubrics.
Mine's good. Mine's waiting for me too. I might go, I'm not sure, I might do.
Right.
Good customer relationship. Great.
And I guess that this was part of the day where they
Here's the building. I've been in this building before, and I still don't know about it.
I work with him, and he gave one to me for Christmas. Like, so it's actually a great book too. So I would highly recommend.
Well, yeah, some people have seen
I would highly recommend it. It's great. It's a great read, and it's not as don't care as you would think. So it's very good.
Infamous, which is why everyone points to Thank you so much.
I won't see it.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, the old joke, John Dillinger, who was a bank back in the 30s.
Oh, thank you
Why
for
do you have
coming.
money? Why do you sue banks? Because that's where the money is, right? So yes, financial institutions are heavily targeted, universities, large commerce retail, so Target, Amazon. I mean, I think that there are people who have legitimate beefs, right? If you make a website and it's non-backable assistive technologies, you have pulled yourself to blame. You've known about this. The EDA was passed in 1990. There's no reason that you think that's an excuse for not letting it accessible. On the other hand, there are plaintiffs' attorneys who pretty much just go around suing people with what they have. It's America. That's what happens. I would hope that, I would hope that people, as I said, do it because it's the right thing. But if you're doing it because you got sued, well, at least you're doing something.
Okay, yeah.
Right. Right. Yes. No, it's not a coincidence. Banks are frequent targets. Yeah. Here, let me give you my card if you think of anything else you want to ask about. Like I said, have not. I'm trying to, there's a conference this summer called Star Trek, like Star Trek the design, which is more, developer centric. I'm trying to get down to that one. I'm not as involved in IXD as I should be. There is an IXD chapter that how is it involved? Yeah, okay. Maybe I need to get down there. Sure.
So that's when I see. I know, I guess that's the point.
Yes.
So I guess when I say because I know.
You are. Definitely on the right track. Like basically the job that I have now,